The blizzard came down from the northern mountains with a fury that nobody in Fort McDowell, Arizona, had seen in 20 years, turning the desert landscape into a treacherous white wasteland that swallowed everything in its path. Xavier Winters pulled his coat tighter around his chest as he urged his horse forward through the knee-deep snow, cursing himself for staying out this long, checking the fence lines of his ranch. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and the temperature had dropped so fast that ice crystals formed on his beard. He was a hardened man of 28, someone who had survived rustlers, droughts, and every other misfortune the West could throw at a rancher, but this storm was something else entirely. His horse whinnied nervously, its breath coming out in great white plumes, and Xavier was about to turn back toward home when he saw something dark against the white expanse ahead. At first, he thought it might be a fallen tree or a dead animal, but as he drew closer, his heart seized in his chest. It was a person, a woman, collapsed in the snow wearing nothing but a thin dress that was now frozen stiff against her body. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as death itself, and for a moment Xavier thought he was looking at a corpse. He jumped from his horse without thinking, his boots crunching in the deep snow as he rushed to her side. When he pressed his fingers against her neck, searching desperately for a pulse, he felt the faintest flutter beneath her icy skin. She was alive, but barely. Xavier knew he had maybe minutes to save her life. His ranch house was too far away, but he had made camp in a sheltered canyon about half a mile back, where he kept a fire going while he worked the outer boundaries of his property. Without hesitation, he scooped the woman into his arms, shocked by how light she felt, how cold her body was against his chest. The journey back to his camp felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 15 minutes. Xavier's muscles burned from carrying her weight through the deep snow while leading his horse behind him. When he finally reached the rocky overhang where he had set up camp, the fire was still burning, protected from the wind by the canyon walls. He laid the woman down as gently as he could on the bedroll he had spread out earlier, then immediately began building up the fire, adding more wood until the flames crackled high and hot. But he knew fire alone would not be enough. He had seen frostbite before, had seen men lose fingers and toes because they warmed up too quickly. This woman needed slow, careful heating, or she would die just as surely as if he had left her in the snow. Xavier grabbed his spare blankets from his saddlebag and wrapped them around her, then positioned her closer to the fire, but not so close that the heat would shock her system. Her dress was soaked through, frozen in places, and he knew he had to get it off her, or the wet fabric would continue to steal what little warmth her body had left. His hands shook, though whether from cold or nerves he could not say, as he carefully began removing her frozen clothing. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, trying to preserve her dignity even in this desperate situation. Once he had her down to her undergarments, he wrapped her in dry blankets and his own spare shirt, then pulled her against his chest, using his body heat to warm her core. He had heard stories of people being brought back from the edge of freezing death this way, skin-to-skin contact being the most effective method when someone was this far gone. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Xavier held the woman close, rubbing her arms and legs through the blankets to encourage circulation, speaking to her even though she could not hear him. The storm raged outside their shelter, but inside the canyon, they were protected. He melted snow in his tin cup and held it over the fire until it was warm, then carefully dripped tiny amounts of water between her blue lips, trying to get some warmth into her from the inside as well. It was near midnight when she finally stirred. A small sound escaped her throat, barely more than a whimper, and her eyelids fluttered. Xavier felt his heart leap with hope. He had been holding her for nearly 6 hours, and his arms were numb, his back aching, but he had not let go once. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, the color a startling green that seemed to glow in the firelight. She looked up at him with confusion and fear, and he quickly spoke in a gentle voice. "Easy now, you are safe. I found you in the snow. You were nearly frozen to death. My name is Xavier Winters, and I am not going to hurt you." The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her whole body began to shake violently as feeling started returning to her limbs, and Xavier knew this was a good sign, even though it looked alarming. He held her tighter, continuing to rub warmth back into her arms. She gasped, and tears began streaming down her face as the pain of thawing set in. Xavier had experienced minor frostbite once himself, and he knew how much it hurt. "I know it hurts something fierce, but that means the blood is flowing again. That is a good thing. You are going to make it through this." She cried against his chest, her fingers clutching weakly at his shirt, and Xavier just held her, murmuring reassurances while the storm continued its assault outside. Eventually, the violent shaking subsided into occasional tremors, and her breathing became more regular. Xavier managed to get more warm water into her, and then some weak broth he made from his dried meat rations. She drank it slowly, her eyes never leaving his face, as though she was trying to decide if she could trust this stranger who had saved her life. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die out there." "What is your name? What were you doing out in this storm?" "Amelia Zimmerman," she managed, her throat still raw. "I was traveling with a wagon train. We were trying to reach Tucson before winter, but we got caught in the storm. The wagon I was in overturned, and I got separated from the others. I tried to find them, but the snow was so thick, and I could not see anything. I just kept walking until I could not walk anymore." Xavier's jaw tightened. A wagon train caught in this blizzard would be in serious trouble. People could have died, probably had died in conditions like these. But there was nothing he could do about it tonight. The storm was too fierce, and Amelia was still too weak. All he could do was focus on keeping her alive and warm until morning brought clearer skies. "We will look for them when the storm breaks. For now, you need to rest and get your strength back." Amelia nodded weakly, and her eyes drifted closed again. Xavier continued to hold her through the night, feeding the fire whenever it burned low, monitoring her breathing and her color. By dawn, the storm had finally begun to ease, and weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. Amelia was sleeping peacefully now, her skin no longer the terrifying blue-white it had been when he found her, but a healthier pink. Her breathing was steady and deep. Xavier carefully extracted himself from their embrace and stood up, his joints protesting after sitting in one position for so long. He stepped out from under the rocky overhang and looked out at the transformed landscape. The desert he knew was gone, replaced by a blanket of white that reflected the morning sun with almost painful brightness. In the distance, he could see smoke rising, and his heart lifted. Someone else had survived the night and had a fire going. He went back to check on Amelia, who was just beginning to stir. Her eyes opened, clearer now than they had been the night before, and she looked around at their camp with more awareness. When her gaze fell on him, she offered a small smile that transformed her face. Xavier felt something shift in his chest at that smile, something he had not felt in a very long time. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," Amelia admitted, trying to sit up. Xavier moved quickly to help her, supporting her back as she adjusted to being upright. "But alive, thanks to you. I cannot believe you stayed out here all night in this storm." I was already camped here when I found you, and I was not about to let you die if I could prevent it." Amelia looked down at herself, realizing she was wearing his shirt and wrapped in his blankets. A flush crept up her neck, but she met his eyes steadily. "You were very honorable. Thank you for that as well. I see smoke in the distance. Might be your wagon train. Do you think you can ride if we go slow? I will manage. I need to know if anyone else survived." Xavier helped her into her dress, which he had dried by the fire overnight. It was wrinkled and worse for wear, but at least it was dry and warm. He gave her his coat to wear over it, and she protested at first, but he insisted. He was used to the cold in ways she was not, and he still had his vest and thick shirt. Once they had packed up the camp, he helped her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, keeping one arm securely around her waist as they began making their way toward the smoke. The ride revealed the true devastation of the storm. They passed the overturned wagon Amelia had mentioned, half buried in snow, its contents scattered across the ground. Further on, they found 2 more wagons that had been abandoned, and Xavier's stomach clenched when he saw dark shapes in the snow that could only be bodies. Amelia made a small sound of distress and turned her face against his chest, and he held her tighter. When they finally reached the source of the smoke, they found about 15 survivors huddled around a large fire, their faces gaunt and exhausted. A woman looked up as Xavier and Amelia approached, and her eyes went wide with shock. She scrambled to her feet and ran toward them. "Amelia." "Oh my God, Amelia, we thought you were dead." Xavier helped Amelia down from the horse, and she was immediately enveloped in the woman's embrace. Others came forward, exclaiming over her survival, asking what had happened. Amelia explained how Xavier had found her and saved her life, and suddenly all eyes were on him. An older man with a weathered face and a gray beard stepped forward, extending his hand. "James Chen, wagon master, we owe you a debt we can never repay, Mr. Winters. When Amelia got separated from us yesterday, we tried to search for her, but the storm was too fierce. We had to focus on getting the remaining wagons circled and keeping people alive. We lost 8 souls last night." Xavier shook his hand, feeling the weight of those words. 8 people dead because of a freak storm. "I am sorry for your losses. This blizzard came out of nowhere. Even those of us who have lived here for years did not see it coming. Is Fort McDowell far from here? We need shelter and supplies. Several of our wagons were damaged or lost, and we have wounded who need proper care. About 8 miles south. The storm will have made the roads difficult, but if we work together, we can get everyone there by nightfall." The survivors began preparing to move, salvaging what they could from the damaged wagons and tending to the injured. Xavier found himself working alongside Amelia, who insisted on helping despite her ordeal. He kept a close eye on her, making sure she was not overexerting herself, and she seemed to sense his concern, offering him reassuring smiles whenever their eyes met. As they worked, Xavier learned more about her. She was 24 years old, originally from Missouri, and had been traveling west with her uncle and his family after her parents died of fever the previous year. Her uncle was one of the 8 who had not survived the storm. The news hit her hard, and Xavier watched as she struggled to hold back tears while continuing to help pack supplies. He admired her strength, the way she kept moving forward even in the face of devastating loss. The journey to Fort McDowell was slow and difficult, with the survivors helping each other through the deep snow. Xavier rode ahead to break trail, making it easier for those on foot to follow. When they finally reached the town, the residents came out in force to help, offering shelter, food, and medical care to the storm survivors. The local doctor, An efficient woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez immediately began tending to the wounded and checking everyone for frostbite. Xavier brought Amelia to the doctor personally, insisting she be examined even though she protested that others needed help more urgently. Dr. Martinez looked her over carefully, checking her fingers and toes, listening to her breathing, asking questions about how she felt. Finally, she pronounced Amelia lucky but healthy, with no lasting damage from her ordeal. "You have Mr. Winters to thank for that," the doctor said, giving Xavier an approving nod. "If he had not found you when he did, or if he had tried to warm you up too quickly, you would not be here right now. He did everything exactly right." Amelia looked at Xavier with such gratitude and something else, something deeper that made his pulse quicken, that he had to look away. He was not used to being looked at like that, like he was some kind of hero. He had just done what anyone would have done. But as the days passed, and the survivors settled into temporary housing in Fort McDowell while they recovered and decided what to do next, Xavier found himself drawn to Amelia again and again. He told himself he just wanted to check on her, make sure she was truly all right, but the truth was he simply wanted to be near her. There was something about her that called to him, a strength and kindness that shone through despite everything she had been through. Amelia was staying at the boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson, a kind widow who had taken in several of the female survivors. Xavier found himself visiting more often than was strictly necessary, bringing supplies, helping with repairs around the building, any excuse to see Amelia. They would talk for hours, sitting on the front porch of the boarding house even though the weather was still cold. She told him about her life in Missouri, about her parents and the dreams she had for her future. He told her about his ranch, about the years he had spent building it up from nothing, about the loneliness of that life. One evening, about a week after he had found her in the snow, Amelia asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Do you ever think about getting married, Xavier?" Having a family. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun set over the snow-covered desert. "I used to think about it all the time when I was younger, but ranching is hard work, and I am out there alone most of the time. It did not seem fair to ask a woman to share that kind of life. So I just focused on the work and told myself maybe someday. And now," Xavier turned to look at her, and the hope and vulnerability in her eyes made his heart ache. "Now I find myself thinking about it again, thinking that maybe the loneliness was harder than the work ever was." Amelia reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I have been thinking, too, about how my uncle always wanted to reach Tucson to start over there, but I do not have any ties to Tucson. I could start over anywhere, even here. Amelia." Her name came out rough, full of emotion he had been trying to keep in check. "I found you frozen in the snow barely more than a week ago. You have been through a terrible trauma, lost your uncle, lost your plans for the future. I do not want you making decisions based on gratitude or because you feel obligated to me." She squeezed his hand, her green eyes fierce. "Is that what you think this is? Gratitude? Xavier, you saved my life, yes, but that is not why I want to stay. When I was lying in that snow, convinced I was going to die, all I could think about was how I had never really lived. I had spent my whole life doing what was expected, going where others led, never taking a chance on what I wanted. And then you appeared like some guardian angel and gave me a second chance. I do not want to waste it. What do you want, Amelia? I want to find out what this is between us. This feeling I get every time you walk into a room, like my heart is going to beat right out of my chest. I want to know you better, spend time with you, see if what I think I am feeling is real. And if it is real, I want to build a life here. With you." Xavier felt like he could not breathe. He had never expected this, had never imagined that someone like Amelia would want someone like him. He was just a rancher, rough around the edges, with calloused hands and a face weathered by sun and wind. But the way she was looking at him, the honesty in her voice, made him believe that maybe, just maybe, this was real. "I would like that too," he said quietly. "More than I can say." They sat together on that porch until the stars came out, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, like they had known each other for years instead of days. When Xavier finally stood to leave, Amelia walked him to his horse. He turned to say good night, and she rose up on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. The touch of her lips against his skin sent warmth flooding through him, better than any fire. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at life, Xavier Winters. I intend to make the most of it." He rode back to his ranch that night feeling like he was floating, the cold night air unable to touch the warmth that had settled in his chest. Over the next few weeks, Xavier and Amelia spent as much time together as they could manage. He taught her to ride properly, taking her out to see his ranch, showing her the land he had worked so hard to build. She was fascinated by everything, asking endless questions about ranching, about the cattle, about his life out here. In turn, she told him about her love of reading and writing, how she had always dreamed of becoming a teacher. Fort McDowell had a small schoolhouse, but the teacher who had been running it had recently moved away and the position was vacant. When Amelia heard about this, her eyes lit up with excitement. She approached the town council about the position, and after a brief interview they offered it to her enthusiastically. Xavier had never seen anyone as happy as Amelia was the day she got that job. She threw her arms around his neck right there in the street, not caring who saw, and he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing at her joy. When he set her down, their faces were close, and the laughter faded into something more intense. He could feel her breath against his lips, see the way her pupils dilated as she looked at him. "Xavier," she whispered, and it was all the invitation he needed. He kissed her gently at first, mindful of the public setting, but Amelia pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss deepened, and Xavier forgot where they were, forgot everything except the feeling of her in his arms, the taste of her lips, the way she made small sounds of pleasure that drove him wild. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he saw that several townspeople were watching them with knowing smiles. Amelia laughed, her face flushed, and buried her face against his chest in embarrassment. "I cannot believe I just did that in the middle of town." "I am not complaining," Xavier said, grinning wider than he had in years. "Though I think we just gave Mrs. Patterson enough gossip to last her through spring." From that day forward, they were officially courting, and everyone in Fort McDowell knew it. Xavier had never been happier. He found himself working harder than ever at the ranch, not because he had to, but because he wanted to build something worthy of Amelia. He started making improvements to his house, fixing things he had let slide when it was just him, adding touches that would make it more comfortable for a woman. A real kitchen stove to replace his crude fireplace cooking setup, curtains for the windows, a proper bed frame instead of just a mattress on the floor. Amelia threw herself into teaching with the same passion she brought to everything else. The children of Fort McDowell adored her, and Xavier loved watching her with them, seeing the patience and care she showed each student. It gave him ideas about their future, about what their own children might be like someday. He had never been the kind of man to rush into things, but with Amelia, everything felt right in a way nothing ever had before. Spring came early that year, melting the unusual snow and returning the desert to its familiar brown and green landscape. Wildflowers bloomed across the hills, painting the countryside in brilliant colors. On a Sunday in early April, Xavier asked Amelia to go on a picnic with him. He took her to a special spot on his ranch, a place where a small creek ran year-round, creating a little oasis of cottonwood trees and green grass. They spread out a blanket and ate the lunch Amelia had prepared, talking and laughing as they always did. But Xavier was nervous, his hand repeatedly going to his vest pocket where he had hidden a small box. He had ridden all the way to Tucson to buy it, wanting to find something perfect for her. Finally, as the sun began to lower in the sky, painting everything in gold and orange light, he pulled out the box and took a deep breath. "Amelia, I know we have not been courting for very long, just a few months, really. And I know that by some standards, we should wait longer, be more proper about this. But I have never been very good at waiting for things that matter, and you matter more than anything else in my life." Amelia's eyes went wide as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small emerald set in it. "The stone reminded me of your eyes," he said softly. "The first thing I really noticed when you woke up that night by the fire. I had never seen anything so beautiful. Xavier." Her voice was thick with tears. "I love you, Amelia Zimmerman. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you were so brave despite being in pain and scared. Every day since then, I have fallen more in love with who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your passion for life and teaching and everything you do. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" Amelia was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too, that brilliant smile that lit up her whole face. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then she was in his arms, kissing him with such love and joy that he thought his heart might burst. They held each other as the sun set, making whispered promises about their future, about the life they would build together. Xavier had saved Amelia's life that night in the snow, but as he held her now, he realized she had saved his too, in a different way. She had taken his lonely existence and filled it with love and purpose and hope. They were married 6 weeks later in a ceremony at Fort McDowell's small church. The whole town turned out to celebrate, including many of the survivors from the wagon train who had decided to settle in the area. James Chen gave Amelia away, standing in for her late uncle, and Dr. Martinez stood up as a witness. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. When Xavier kissed his bride, sealing their vows, he felt like the luckiest man alive. Their wedding night was spent at the ranch that was now their home, and Xavier carried Amelia over the threshold, making her laugh with delight. He had spent days preparing the house, wanting everything to be perfect for her. She walked through each room, touching things with gentle hands, exclaiming over the improvements he had made. When they finally made their way to the bedroom, Xavier was nervous in a way he had not been since he was a young man. But Amelia took his hand and pulled him close, and all his nervousness melted away. They came together with tenderness and passion, discovering each other in the intimate way of newlyweds. Xavier worshipped her with his hands and mouth, wanting to make this perfect for her, wanting to show her how deeply he loved her. Amelia responded with equal passion, her touch setting him on fire, her whispered words of love undoing him completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her, and Xavier felt a peace he had never known before. Life settled into a happy rhythm after that. Amelia continued teaching during the week while Xavier worked the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit together on their porch, watching the sunset and talking about their days. On weekends, Amelia would help with ranch work, proving to be a capable hand despite her lack of experience. She learned to rope and brand, though she drew the line at slaughtering, and Xavier did not blame her for that. She also started a small garden near the house, growing vegetables and herbs that transformed their meals from simple bachelor fare to something much more enjoyable. Their first year of marriage was blissful. They had their small disagreements, of course, learning to navigate life as partners, but they always worked through them with patience and love. Xavier discovered that Amelia had a stubborn streak a mile wide when she thought she was right, but he loved that about her, the way she stood her ground. She discovered that Xavier could be withdrawn when something was bothering him, tending to brood rather than talk, but she learned how to draw him out, how to make him share his burdens with her. In the spring of 1886, a year and a half after their wedding, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening after supper, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly, her eyes shining with happiness and a little bit of fear. Xavier felt like the ground had dropped out from under him, but in the best possible way. He pulled Amelia into his arms, holding her carefully like she might break. "A baby, we are going to have a baby." He repeated it, trying to make it feel real. Then he pulled back to look at her, concern suddenly flooding him. "Are you all right? Are you feeling well? Should you be working? Maybe you should stop teaching until after the baby comes." Amelia laughed at his sudden overprotectiveness, but she also looked touched by it. "I am fine, Xavier. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still working. I am not going to stop teaching yet. Though I admit, I might need to stop for a while once the baby comes." Xavier became impossibly attentive during Amelia's pregnancy, fussing over her in ways that sometimes made her roll her eyes, but always made her smile. He hired a hand to help with the ranch work so he could spend more time at home, making sure Amelia was not overexerting herself. He read every book about childbirth and infant care he could get his hands on, wanting to be prepared. When Amelia's belly began to swell with their child, Xavier would spend hours with his hand resting on it, feeling their baby kick and move, marveling at the miracle of it all. The baby came on a cold November night, arriving 2 weeks earlier than expected. Xavier rode like a demon to fetch Dr. Martinez, and the doctor arrived just in time to help deliver a healthy baby boy. Xavier would never forget the moment Dr. Martinez placed his son in his arms, this tiny, perfect being with a full head of dark hair and his mother's green eyes. He looked at Amelia, exhausted but glowing with joy in their bed, and felt tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered, moving to sit beside Amelia so she could see their son. "You are perfect. I love you so much." They named him Thomas, after Xavier's father who had died when Xavier was young. Little Thomas was a good baby, content and healthy, and Xavier took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He would walk the floor with Thomas at night when the baby fussed, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until Thomas fell asleep against his chest. Amelia would watch them from the bed, her heart so full of love she thought it might overflow. When Thomas was 6 months old, Amelia returned to teaching part-time, bringing the baby with her to school. The students loved having a baby in the classroom, and it became a teaching opportunity as well, with the older girls learning about child care. Xavier would ride into town every afternoon to collect his wife and son, and the three of them would ride home together, a family. The years passed in this happy way. Thomas grew into a bright, active toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin girls they named Rose and Lily. The ranch house suddenly felt very full, with babies crying and children laughing, and Xavier loved every chaotic moment of it. He built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, including a separate room for each child. Amelia eventually stopped teaching to focus on raising their children, though she missed it sometimes. Xavier would find her reading to the kids for hours, or teaching them their letters and numbers, and he knew she was still a teacher at heart. When the children were a bit older, she started offering lessons to other ranch children in the area once a week, turning their parlor into a temporary schoolroom. Xavier loved watching her in her element, patient and encouraging with every child who came through their door. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that tested the ranch's resources, cattle diseases that decimated their herd one year, financial struggles that required careful budgeting and hard decisions. But Xavier and Amelia faced everything together, their partnership only growing stronger with each challenge they overcame. They built a successful ranch through hard work and determination, becoming respected members of the Fort McDowell community. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Amelia back to the spot where he had proposed. The children stayed with Mrs. Patterson for the night, giving them a rare evening alone. They spread out a blanket just as they had all those years ago, and Amelia rested her head on Xavier's shoulder as they watched the sunset. "Do you ever think about that night in the snow?" Amelia asked softly. "When you found me?" "All the time," Xavier admitted. "I think about how close I came to not finding you. If I had turned back 5 minutes earlier, if I had gone a different direction, if the snow had buried you just a little bit more. It terrifies me, thinking about a life where I never met you, where you died out there in that storm." Amelia lifted her head to look at him, her green eyes serious. "But you did find me. You saved my life, and in doing so, you gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a love so deep it sometimes takes my breath away. I was literally frozen, dead to the world, and you brought me back to life in every possible way." Xavier cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "You brought me back to life too, Amelia. I was just going through the motions before you came along, existing but not really living. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something that mattered. I love you more today than I did the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a beautiful life together from the ashes of tragedy. Around them, the desert bloomed with spring wildflowers, painting the landscape in brilliant colors, a reminder that even in the harshest environments, beauty and love could flourish. The children grew up healthy and strong, each developing their own personalities and interests. Thomas became a skilled rancher like his father, taking over more of the ranch operations as he got older. Rose developed a love of horses and became an expert rider, competing in local races and winning more often than not. Lily inherited her mother's love of teaching and books, spending hours in the small library Amelia had built up over the years. When Xavier turned 50, he started slowing down a bit, letting Thomas take on more responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the ranch. It gave him more time to spend with Amelia, and they discovered they enjoyed this quieter phase of life just as much as the busy years of raising children. They would take long rides together across the ranch land, or sit on their porch in the evening, holding hands and watching the stars come out. Amelia's hair turned silver, but Xavier thought she was more beautiful than ever. She had aged gracefully, laugh lines crinkling around her eyes, her face showing the marks of a life well lived. His own hair had gone gray years ago, and his joints ached on cold mornings, but he was content. More than content. He was grateful for every single day he got to spend with the woman he loved. On a warm summer evening in 1905, Xavier and Amelia sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were grandparents now, with Thomas having married a local girl and given them 2 grandchildren, with another on the way. Rose was courting a young man from Tucson who worked as a horse trainer, and Lily was preparing to go to teachers' college in Phoenix. Life was moving forward, the next generation taking their place in the world. "We have had a good life, have we not?" Amelia said, her head resting on Xavier's shoulder. "The best life," Xavier agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Do you remember what you said to me that first night when I asked your name?" Xavier thought back over the years, trying to recall. "I told you that you were safe and that I was not going to hurt you. You kept that promise every single day for 27 years, Amelia said softly. "You have been my protector, my partner, my greatest love. I want you to know that I would not change a single moment of our life together, Xavier Winters. Not one moment." Xavier felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, this woman could move him to tears with just a few words. He turned to look at her, taking in every beloved detail of her face. "I would not change anything either. Finding you in that snow was the moment my real life began. Everything before that was just preparation for loving you." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, their hands clasped, their hearts beating in rhythm. The desert night was cool and peaceful, filled with the familiar sounds of their ranch, their home. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The fire that Xavier had built all those years ago to save Amelia's life had become the hearth of a family, a warmth that would continue to spread through generations to come. Xavier kissed his wife's silver hair and pulled her closer, grateful for every frozen moment that had led to this warm embrace, for every hardship they had overcome together, for every joy they had shared. He had pulled her from the snow and warmed her back to life, but in doing so, she had done the same for him, thawing a heart he had not even realized was frozen, filling his life with a love that burned brighter than any fire. And as they sat together watching the stars, surrounded by the life they had built, Xavier knew that some things were simply meant to be, written in the stars long before that blizzard ever came down from the northern mountains and changed both their lives forever.